we will often tolerate and even over tolerate stuff that isn't okay with us because we think that that's compassion. It's not. If there's an ounce of self-sacrifice, we have left the realm of compassion and now we are into tolerance. And listen, sometimes it's okay to make that compromise and make those sacrifices. Like that's a choice that everybody gets to make. But what's more amazing is when we could be in a place of compassion and generosity. And acceptance is an inherent part of compassion where we could be like, got it. It's not just about I accept you fully exactly as you are. It's I accept that this is who you are and how you're built. And this is how you do things, right? Like I said earlier, the ABCs, actions, behaviors, and choices. And I'll give an example, right? I have people in my family that are really hard to get along with, but I, a long time ago, found a lot of peace by just accepting that they are who they are. I can't change who they are. I don't understand why they do the things they do sometimes. However, I can choose how I'm going to engage with it from a place of acceptance that I wouldn't be able to do if I was wanting them to change.
Listener, welcome to the Better Than Rich show. We have a great guest today, Elizabeth DiAlto, and you might know her from her podcast, Embodied podcast. She has over 3 million downloads on her podcast, over 400 episodes. She is really has started a huge movement, and she was kind of in the coaching space before coaching was a cool thing to do. In this episode, she gives a framework that you're going to want to, you might even want to get pen and paper out when she talks about it, but she goes into a deep dive of awareness, of self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-acceptance, self-trust, self-respect. And we have a whole conversation around what that means, talking about awareness, talking about letting go of control, talking about trust beyond just me. And then we also go into a whole conversation around her take on how she doesn't really like the whole polarity concept of femininity versus masculinity. We talk a little bit about how to create safe spaces for the opposite sex. So we talk about some really some topics that some people would choose not to talk about. And that's what I love. I even shared a story that I've never shared with anyone before because I felt it was like there was some shame around it. So again, great conversation with Elizabeth DiAlto. She's raw, she's honest. She has a great approach to spirituality, to healing arts. And she started her profession in sales and then moved into health and fitness. And now she has a huge movement and really excited to bring her to you today. So get ready for another great episode of the Better Than Rich show with Elizabeth DiAlto. Welcome back to the Better Than Rich show. I am here with Elizabeth DiAlto. I am super excited for this convo. We've been looking to have you on the show for a few months now because I get your Instagram Saturday morning little memes, and my wife and I, Lindsay, will look at them and we're like, this shit is hilarious. So listener, right now, if you do not follow Elizabeth DiAlto on Instagram, you need to, because some of these like memes and stuff on Saturdays are really hilarious. So welcome to the show, Elizabeth. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a long time. I mean, shoot, the last time I was just saying right before we clicked record, the last time we actually, saw each other was back Cutco circa probably 2004. Been quite some time. And you were one of the first people that kind of transitioned that I noticed, and my wife Lindsay noticed, that you kind of transitioned out of Cutco and like I'm going to start my own independent coaching movement. It was like you and like Hal Elrod, like John Berghoff, like some of these like really great influential people that said, I'm going to just like go out on a journey of self-discovery and try to influence and impact other people. I've been wanting to ask you ever since then. We're going back, 20 years now. What,
so long ago.
what the hell were you thinking? Like, walk me through that. Like, walk me through this, like, I'm going to leave the cult of Cutco and try to explore my own thing. I say the cult, obviously I'm still a part of it. I still run an office, but talk to me about that. I'm so curious.
Well, when I first left, I did like the Cutco to Aerotech, the Cutco to Cintas pipeline, which only lasted a year. Because for all intents and purposes, when you work at Cutco, you're not really working a corporate job, right? Like you work for the company, but you're doing your own thing. And that I always loved that. I realized I was really built. They kind of build this like entrepreneur mindset, even though you're working like technically for a company. But, and I left in 2007 after running my district office in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years. And it was just so hard. That was a really tough territory. And to my understanding, they've never put anyone there ever since I left. It was kind of like, I remember my division manager at the time, Jeff Gamboa, being like, if anyone could do this, you can. And I'm like, I don't know that that's like how I want to be going into something, but okay. So when I left, I was so burned out and I actually wanted a job, or I thought I wanted a job. I did not want to be in charge. I wanted to be able to just like show up, do a sales job, go home, and that be that. And that lasted for an excruciating year because I am really not built to work for other people. And it actually, everything always in my career has unfolded like quite organically. Like something kind of pops up and I'm like, that sounds good. I'll try that. And so when I was working at Cintas, I was selling uniforms. I was living in Hoboken, New Jersey, and I was working out at the New York Sports Club there downtown. And I'd always been into fitness. I'd always been an athlete since I was little. And the manager of the gym actually came up to me one day and was like, have you ever thought about being a trainer? Like, you look like you would enjoy that or you'd be good at it or something. And I was like, yeah, like, how does it work? Like, I love all these fitness classes. You know, I've been doing like workout videos since I was like 12 years old, like Buns of Steel, like old type stuff. And so I was like, all right. So I started studying for like personal training certifications. I started teaching all these group exercise classes. I taught Zumba, total body conditioning, spinning. I got all these certifications. And it was cool because like from the Cutco experience, right, I had been speaking and training and up in front of people since I was 19 years old. And at that point, I was like 24, 25. And so I was like, great, I'll just do something I actually really enjoy. And I did that for a couple of years. But then the problem was the schedule, right? Like early morning clients, evening clients. But then I started to get into this like online world. I started blogging. And I remember talking to John Vroman about this in like 2009. Like I set up my first fitness blog. And at this point, I think he was also out of Cutco. I think he was already doing Front Row Foundation stuff at that point. And I don't know. You're like, what were you thinking? I was thinking, I'm not built to work for people. I want to do something that's fun, that helps people. Like, so then eventually I got into this mastermind with this woman named Marie Forleo in 2011. And that's pretty much where I learned how to run an online business. And then, yeah, same. I just like kept meeting people and I was like, okay, I'll try that. Okay, I'll try that. And it was like, set up a YouTube channel, get on social media. And then eventually around 2013 was really when I was like, all right, I'm done with fitness. I'm much more interested in doing deeper, more kind of like spiritually oriented or embodiment oriented things. But all along the way, I was just making stuff because that's what I'm kind of built to do.
Well, two things. Number one, Jeff Gamboa is currently my division manager right now, which is actually funny.
Oh, amazing.
So I'll tell him he said hi. Number two, what's really fun about this story is you're allowing things to reveal themselves, taking the step, trust in the process, letting things reveal themselves. And you were starting this online business, online coaching thing before it was cool. Now, like everyone does it. It's like, oh my God, I could do this. But that wasn't the case in like 2011, 2013. It was like, this is uncharted territory. How might you be able to, what would you say to somebody? Maybe it's not that specifically right now of like going into an online program because that's not as uncharted. But if someone is trying to navigate into uncharted territories and trusting a process like you have embodied over the course of the last 20 years, telling your story of the last 20 years, what advice or counsel would you give to that person that's trying to say, yeah, Elizabeth, I don't know, this whole trust in the process thing, this is scary. How can I like take a step and not know what the next one is after that? Well, what do you say to that person?
This is literally, so the core of everything I've been doing for the last decade is self-trust. And from self-trust, it stems out into like trusting yourself and trusting life, which life can be, I say it that way because In my world, we go like really deep into spiritual and esoteric things. So if people are into that, it's more like trusting God, trusting the divine, whatever you call that. And if that's not really your thing, some people are more about like trusting the universe, or call it whatever you want to call it. But it's really about understanding like there's certainly something out here that's guiding you beyond just you, right? So you don't have to do this radical self-reliance thing. So that's why I talk about like trusting yourself and also trusting life. Because here's the thing that a lot of people who are into like hustle culture, which that was Cutco all day, right? It was just, you get out what you put in. And that worked for me in my early 20s. But at a certain point, I was like, I can't grind like this because I need to have a life too, right? So there's so many different ways and modalities out there to kind of learn about yourself and do this discovery and self-awareness work to kind of figure out, who are you? How are you built? What are your values? What are your priorities? And I like to give people this little tip, which something I've been saying since I was a personal trainer is like, hate me now, love me later. Because some people, this like really calls them out on the gap between what they say they value and what they're actually prioritizing, is if you want to really know what your priorities are, look at your calendar and look at your credit card and your bank statements. Because where you spend your time and where you spend your money is going to tell you what your priorities are. And that's not meant to be like a gotcha, right? But some people are out here thinking that they're following what's important to them and what they value, but that's really not how life is being. And in some cases, that's not, people have families, people have kids, whatever. You have to provide, you have to do, it's your health, it's this, it's that. Maybe there's some caretaking. There's all kinds of reasons why that might be the thing. So it's not a criticism, but to get those things sunk up, who are you? How are you built? What are your values? What are you prioritizing? That helps you trust the process because it shows you actually where you need to make tweaks. It shows you where you're out of alignment. It shows you where you're tolerating things where maybe you don't need to be. And it actually really helps people focus in on where they have choices they may not realize they have, right? Because when people aren't trusting, like what's the opposite of trust is control, right? And control is what we try to do when we're afraid, when we think we know better, when we're not willing to just like kind of zoom out and just like pay attention for a little bit to kind of see what life is presenting us with. Because that's what I was doing, not even on purpose. I'd be like pushing, trying to make something work, and it wasn't working. And I really believe in that Einstein quote we've all heard 1,000 times, like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I'm like, all right, if I'm not getting a different result and this keeps being hard, there has to be some kind of pivot, right? Like one of my teachers, I did this amazing erotic movement arch training a couple of years ago, and my teacher, Rie, would say, in the resistance, there's always an opening. And we came by that through movement, right? So if we're like rolling around on the ground, like moving our bodies and you get stuck somewhere, it's like, all right, how do I unfurl? Like, how do I roll myself out of this? And life is like that too, right? So if you're stuck, if there's resistance, if there's something, there's always an opening somewhere. But so when it comes to trust, a lot of people can't just like jump into trust. Okay, I trust myself, I trust life, because they have all kinds of experiences telling them that that's unsafe or whatever. But can you just make that little pivot? Can you just find the opening to take one little step? I think so many people are about like the big massive action, but the real key, like everything that you say, like my journey over the last 20 years, is just like small incremental changes all over time, right? Just little bursts of courage here and there. And my thing that I'm really good at is like being afraid, but doing something anyway. Like I just don't let fear get in the way. I deal with it. I have my own practices and stuff. And then I'm like, all right, what's the little step I could take now? And then what's amazing is each time I take a little step, that's almost like me showing life, okay, I'm doing my part. So then life can meet me and do its part as well. Does that make sense?
Makes tons of sense. That was such a good rant there, Elizabeth, because listener, if you just break down, let go of control, trust beyond just me, these choices are always available. I definitely want to hear more about this erotic movement thing. That was compelling. I want to come back to that. But I also
nobody ever wants to talk about that.
Yeah, right. I don't agree. I want to hear about that.
Kidding.
The resistance, I really like that. The resistance offers this opening. and this awareness of where you're spending your time and your money. What really stood out to me, though, was this burst of courage in one step. I actually haven't heard that it's said so eloquently before, where it's like, I say tiny actions daily, TAD, tiny actions daily, TAD, small, tiny incremental TADs. But this burst of courage to take that first step is a really great way of saying the same thing. And sometimes it's hard to muster up that courage because it takes this vulnerability of like, what if, facing the fears, the unknown, and strengthen your relationships. So I'd love to hear if you have any more specific tips or tools under the umbrella of like, what can someone do under the umbrella of self-discovery? It's like, I want to really understand myself even better. I know these fears exist. I know I'm spending my money this way. I'm spending my time this way. Are there any practical tools that have served you or that you provide to your following that's like, all right, these are some other ways that you can, learn more about yourself and trust yourself?
So, in 2017, I got invited to speak at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition's national conference about self-love. And up until that point, I wasn't like specifically or rather explicitly talking about self-love. But the person that invited me was like, I mean, obviously this is baked into everything you do. It's just like how you move through the world. So in giving that talk, I developed this framework that I didn't realize was a framework until like a year or two later, because they were just my bullet points for the talk. But then every year when people join the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, they get the archives of like all the talks from all the conferences ever. And so each year, every time a new cohort would start, I would get tons of DMs, get tagged in all these posts on Instagram because people would watch my talk and be like, oh my God. And this is one of those things, and I want to share with people around the self-trust. So often, the things that come most naturally to us feel like nothing. It feels like we're not even doing anything. So why bother sharing it, right? Because we're so attached to things needing to be like revolutionary or innovative. But it's often not until you put yourself out there and then see the reflection come back to you that what you said or what you did was really helpful for other people. So I share that piece because I want to share that framework because it's the answer to your question. But I also want to share that example for people of you don't know. If you're just sitting around afraid and not doing stuff, you won't know because you'll never be able to give your own self and you'll never see your own self in the light that you need to have reflected back to you from other people to see if what you're doing is even worth it. And that kind of goes again to that getting out of the radical individualism thing. Like even the idea of being self-made, that's such bullshit because everyone has support. Even if you're doing like the lion's share of stuff yourself, you wouldn't be able to if not for the other people in your life, even if they're not directly helping you like deliver whatever it is that you do in the world. So there's that part. But my self-love framework that came out of that talk, there's 5 parts to it, and it goes in order on purpose. It's self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-acceptance, self-trust, and then self-respect. Self-awareness, like we already mentioned, like just you gotta be able to observe yourself and see how you're actually showing up to life and in life in the different areas of life, which I usually classify that as like health, wealth, relationships, and then personal development or spirituality, whatever you want to call that. But then the self-knowledge is the thing I was already saying is who are you and how are you built? And here, this is where I love personality tests, typologies. I personally love things like astrology, human design, the gene keys, because those things, they're not the be all end all. We don't need to like revolve our lives around our astrological chart or our horoscope, but it just gives us like some details. And whatever resonates with you, you could be like, oh yeah, that does make some sense. I am built like that. What I love about those things too, even the ones that are self-assessments, is it just helps us to see how different we are from other people, which also helps us to make those choices that we were talking about earlier. We always have choices we don't realize we have that are more appropriate for us. Because one of the things we all waste a lot of time on is making choices we think we're supposed to because they work for other people. But if we're not built like the people whose advice we're taking, each time we fail or it doesn't quite go the way we wanted it to, you have to be able to go, oh, that approach wasn't for me. Not, oh, what's wrong with me? It works for other people. right? So that's the self-knowledge piece. And then the self-acceptance is so important because we can't move into self-trust or self-respect until we just accept that we are who we are. We're built the way we're built. Some things we could work on, some things we can't. So the things we can't, we kind of got to accept and learn how to deal with. Like I was telling you before we started the interview, I have my notebook here. I write things down. I have ADHD. So sometimes I like go on tangents or lose my frame of thought, and I got to be reeled back in. You're already noticing my tangents that I go on. But I always try to loop it back. And then, we all have great strengths. We all have things we really suck at. And for me, one of the biggest blessings is accepting the shit that I am so bad at. So I could like hire people or get help with those things and not waste my time doing those things. Then after the acceptance piece, it's easier to trust because we've rooted out with self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-acceptance stuff that we would have had resistance to before. Then we're more open to trust because we're relinquishing a bit of control because we've accepted some things and identified more things that we can't control. And then the ultimate part of it is self-respect, because then each time I always talk about ABCs, right? Actions, behaviors, and choices. We can let those things be based on all the other parts of the framework, which lets us show up more as who we are, trusting ourselves, making those choices, and it accumulates into, it's easier to be courageous. It's easier to like choose yourself and be yourself, because that's one of the things. Most people are so afraid of rejection. They're constantly trying to be what they think the world wants to avoid rejection. But when you do that acceptance step, you don't have to do that.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked that question. I really love that framework: awareness, knowledge, acceptance, trust, respect. I think it's a really beautiful framework. And what it reminded me of, it's actually an interesting thought. I hope it's cool if I'm going in this direction here, because it's a little off tangent, talking about tangents. I seem to remember during this, there was a chapter of your life that I was kind of observing from the sidelines, and it was almost like a no bra movement or something like that was happening. And I was like, obviously I was intrigued. I'm like, well, I want to hear more. I want to see more about this. Literally, I want to see more about this. And I was like, but under this umbrella, I saw this, the teenage boy in me was like, hell yeah, that's exciting. Let me go check it out. But then the mature version of me is like, this takes a lot of courage. Like, this is really cool for someone to stand up for what they believe in and like literally let it out and say, this is what this is. I'm accepting myself. I don't care what other people think. I love what you think, but it doesn't necessarily affect me. This is who I am. This is where I'm at in my life. This is where I'm at in my journey. And that's what was you triggered that memory for me as you were talking about some of this. So I would love to just explore that just a little bit of like, did some of this framework, when you created this framework, was that around that same time of like, let your boobies out type of time frame or no?
No, it wasn't. And so what's funny is that there's actually, this always makes me laugh when I think about it. So I have a breast massage video on YouTube, fully clothed, that has like 1.6 million views or something, because it's been up since 2014.
Okay.
But what's hilarious, there's 3 types of comments on that video. There's like 16-year-olds who were like, will this make my boobs bigger? There's women who were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you so much. And then of course there's men who are like, thanks, I massaged my penis to this. And that's one of the things that made it courageous, right? Like, if you're a woman and you're going to put anything out on the internet related to your body, even if you're not doing it, you're not objectifying yourself, it's not meant to be sexualized, you will be objectified and sexualized. So like, I knew that, and I was okay with that, because the point actually was, it's actually bras, like, it's bad for the lymphatic system, Underwire, like, women don't necessarily realize like all that constriction, what it can do and create in the body, different pains, tension, tightness, like there's all kinds of things. And I will say this, that was 2014, and almost 10 years later now, bras have come a really long way. Mm. So I personally was just moving away from like the really constrictive, restrictive kind of stuff. But the more important part of that was getting women to connect with their bodies and reclaim like their sensuality. separate from sexuality. Because part of my mission is always to help women specifically connect to their bodies in a way of acknowledging its sacredness. And again, like de-objectify ourselves, like unhook from the over-objectification, the over-sexualization that like culture, society, and so many people put on us, regardless of shape, size, age, like sexuality, gender, like whatever, and come into your own, like claim that and own that in a way that you decide what it means to you, which comes back to the erotic movement arts training, even all of that. That's like devotional movement. It's sensual, even though, you know, it involves pole dancing. Like it's not for anyone. It's not to be performative. It's to be with and in your own self. And then beyond that, whatever you want to do with it is amazing, but it's art. Like it's a form of expression. I have a manifesto on my website that I wrote in like 2016, I think. And part of one of the sentences is, you know, you are a work in progress and a work of art. And it doesn't matter what gender you are listening to this. Like that's true of everybody, but it's different and unique for women specifically to get to experience ourselves, our beauty, our sexuality, our sensuality, separate from how the world is telling us it is or should be your desires from us, you know?
I have a question on this. We had John Vroman on the episode on the podcast, and he went to Burning Man and he said, I learned about one thing about myself is like, I need to dance more. he's like, I just need to dance more and express myself more. It's a really good episode. So listener, you could go back and check that out. But what I was curious on is something that in the Front Row Dad community that I'm in with John is we talk about how to create the space for the women in our life to feel sensual. So how, from your experience of what you have, whether it be in intimate relationships or observed in other people you've worked with, how does the man or the masculine play a role in order for the feminine to truly feel seen and loved and understood and safe? What are some ways that the masculine could really allow for that to exist without judgment from what you've seen?
Don't make it about you. Don't make it about you, because this is actually one of the biggest functions of our culture is like the male gaze. Look that up, see what that means, and see how that affects women all day, every day, no matter who they are, where they are, all over the world. There was this tweet many years ago, this Twitter thread that went super viral because it was like, hey, ladies, what would you do after 10 o'clock at night if men were not allowed out of the house? And it was just so illuminating how ingrained it is for women or women identifying or cisgender women looking folks that we're not safe out and about in the world with men. So first things first is for men to do some diligence to actually understand the overarching unsafety that women feel and why. Because we think about things that you would never consider. And a big memory actually I have when I lived in San Diego, I think this was 2014 or 2015, I went on a Thanksgiving downtown San Diego. We were feeding some homeless people. So we had put together, you know, little bags with all kinds of stuff in it, and we were passing them out. And I was with two guy friends, and it was me. And the whole time I'm like on guard, looking over my shoulder, making sure I see where my friends are, what's going on, who's near me, not going too close to people. And I remember asking them on our way back to the car, being like, do you even go on alert? And they're like, no, you know, like, just don't think about it. So there's like the primal just fear or concern of like just being a woman moving through the world. That is, for men to understand that is helpful, because then little tiny things being out and about in the world that you all could do to make our lives easier, or to take a proactive role in at least being someone, whether it's someone you know or for a stranger, who is safer than other people out there, which then contributes to an energetic of the world can eventually be a safer place for all of us. So like, that's kind of like a big broad stroke answer. But then in your own world, ask the women in your life, what do they need? Because it's the more important thing is that it's going to be unique for everybody. All of us it's going to be different, right? Everyone's going to feel uncomfortable or comfortable or safe or unsafe in different ways, in different times, in different ways, phases and stages of their lives. And that's the biggest thing, to not generalize us, just as I'm not trying to generalize you all, right? And ask individual people in your life.
I cannot be the spokesperson for all men today, but I can be the spokesperson for myself of the work that I've been doing and still on the journey of. And I really love this topic. Could we stay in this lane for just a little bit?
Yeah,
Is that right?
Yeah.
So a couple things that you triggered. Number one, a story that nobody knows. I specifically remember in a relationship I was in my 20s, and we were at a parking lot. We were tailgating for a football game, and it was with my previous girlfriend. We had our little dog and a couple of our group of friends, and there was glass in the parking lot. And I was in an argument of some bullshit with my significant other, and I was just so aloof that I wasn't really paying attention. And she says, "Our dog is in danger. I'm in danger. The parking lot has glass in it. There's glass all over the place. You're not even paying attention to us." Now, in the moment, I was like, well, you're being a bitch, right? That's like young 20-year-old version of me. I was probably like, I don't know, 20, 21, 22, 23, somewhere in that range, right? And it didn't really register with me, her lens, until I went to Date with Destiny with Tony Robbins. And Tony asked, it was on relationship day, and he asked the audience, like, raise your hand as you're walking. If you're at nighttime walking to your car in a dark parking lot, raise your hand if you ever feel like unsafe. And who raised their hand? All the women. And he went on this whole segment of understanding safety from the lens of the feminine. And that's why this feeling safe, feeling seen, feeling understood. And it's like the masculine's job and their role is to create the environment where safety is really at the forefront of what you're saying. And that was something that 23-year-old version of me, I didn't know this. It wasn't taught. I never went through an educational series. I never saw it. I never witnessed it. I never learned it. It wasn't like my dad demonstrated that. It's not like my mom even taught me. It's not something that's, it's like an unspoken unawareness for men. Because if you also think about it, nowadays, a 23-year-old, what do we see? What does a 23-year-old male see? If we really think about it, a lot of girls in bikinis on social media. A lot of that. So it's like, it's pretty confusing for like a young, aspiring male that's being raised in this type of environment without that exposure, without the education. I was on that journey of figuring stuff out so I can handle and be a man and be the version of me that I want to be for my husband, for my wife, for my son, to raise him as a man, as a caring human, as a front row dad, a family man with a business versus a businessman with family. This is very important for me. And where does one learn this? Who's teaching this? Who's responsible? And we can't say it's global belief, because if it's a global, it doesn't get done. What's in our control? So like, with that being said, with that framework, what do we do about that? Like, where does this begin? And in your opinion, at least.
So how do I put this? It's so big, but, this is really one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about talking about liberation work. So how do we unhook from all of like the systems of oppression and supremacy that make up our culture? Because they're like these invisible threads, these unconscious biases that we all have. Like there's so many more, even, threads that just talk about how we take it so for granted as women, for example, that just the world is not a safe place for us. We've normalized these, like when you think about some of the ridiculous things so many of us do, like to use your example of walking to your car at night in the dark, find me a woman who's never heard to like hold your keys between your fingers, right? Or have some mace in your bag or whatever. Funniest thing, when I moved to Miami, because I moved from across the country, so I went first, like literally within 72 hours, I went to Dick's Sporting Goods to get a baseball bat and to get some pepper spray. And because, my family, we always keep a baseball bat in the house. And I didn't have any pepper spray. And I go up to the register and the girl behind the register is like, "Oh, you look like you're about to get into a fight." I'm like, "I'm not trying to, but I'll be ready." Cause that, you feel like, I'm like, this is a new city. I don't know my way around yet. I don't know how people roll here. So it really is awareness, right? Like I'm really there's this liberatory consciousness framework by a woman named Dr. Barbara J. Love that starts with awareness, and then it's analysis, and then it's action, and then it's accountability. And it kind of, not everything freaking starts with awareness, right? We were talking about my self-love framework earlier. So it's like, just listen to people who have different lived experiences. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, I want to say something about this note about how confusing it is to see all these things that happen online, like women in bikinis or whatever, like they're so liberated, but they're doing that in a controlled environment where they do feel safe. That's different for some people. Just because someone is doing that online, right? They made that video. They had control over the setting, where they did it, how they did it, who shot, like who sees it, it's going on their platform, and but being out about in the world, perhaps that way, might look different for them in practice than in video or digital content,
Yeah, it does. It does bring up a curiosity, because obviously safety is one of them, right? To really create the space for the feminine. The other one is feeling understood and feeling seen. Do you feel like those two are not as weighted as heavily as the safety, in your opinion and from your experience? Because, I think about safety, of course, is at the forefront. I mean, that's our survival mechanism. We got to feel safe. I'd assume, just because of our primal instinct, we got to make sure that we're feeling safe. That, that's the amygdala. Like, all right, that's humans, not just the feminine, but like that's who we are. We got to make sure that we're not in danger, flight or fight, right? So I'd assume there's part of the primal instinct, and you tack on the feminine of that primal instinct. There's even more weight to why safety is going to come before feeling seen or feeling understood. When it comes to the framework, obviously I'm following Date with Destiny, and not everyone can, I went with my wife. We went, it was our honeymoon from me. Her honeymoon from
That's amazing.
Her honeymoon. We went to her version of the honeymoon, my version of the honeymoon. I said, we're going to go to Date with Destiny, 10 grand worth every dollar. It was like so important for us to just have the language, the framework, a foundation for our marriage. It was really important for me. So obviously she went, and I'm just so grateful that we did that experience together, so I can learn this framework that we're talking about here. So, and I know this is something that you're really passionate about, is in a lot of what you do with this self-love and self-actualization. But as a man having this conversation, well, what can we do? We start with conversations like this. So just, if you just kind of riff on, if safety, if we already, there's obviously more we could talk about with safety, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the feeling seen and feeling understood as well, because assuming we're in a relationship, the safety, hopefully we've already kind of checked that box. We're in an intimate relationship with someone where we've created enough of a safe environment for our partner that we now want to create the environment for sensuality to exist, for companionship, for connection, for that, like even more of openness, like really like creating that environment for that exists. You maybe you do that for a stranger, but I'd assume it's more of like for that partner. But I'd like for you to hear your take on some of this stuff.
So here's one of the things I always tell people as I go through the self-love framework, and I'm like, and here's the thing, once you get all this stuff down for yourself, just take the word self off of it, and then do awareness, knowledge, acceptance, trust, and respect for others. Right. So that's also part of it, right? Awareness. observe, how does your partner roll, like get to know them, who are they, how are they built, what are your differences, right? And then acceptance. I would say, especially your piece here about the word understanding, acceptance is more important than understanding, because sometimes understanding is not possible. We're all so different. Like, I'm never going to understand why some people do the things they do because I'm just built so differently, but I can accept that they do them. Does that distinction make sense?
So I want to say yes, just to push back just a smidge. So acceptance, so understood, me, when I think about feeling understood, I feel like it's like a compassion, it's an empathy, it's a feeling of like, I feel where you're coming from. And when I hear acceptance, it's like, I just accept you. Regardless of flaws, regardless of anything. I don't know. I feel like there might be different, but maybe I'm having a tough time contextualizing. Yeah, please help.
And it might just be semantics for people. So of course, use whatever word works for you. But something I talk about when I talk about acceptance is the difference between compassion and tolerance. We will often tolerate and even over tolerate stuff that isn't okay with us because we think that that's compassion. It's not. If there's an ounce of self-sacrifice, we have left the realm of compassion and now we are into tolerance, right? And listen, sometimes it's okay to make that compromise and make those sacrifices. Like that's a choice that everybody gets to make. But what's more amazing is when we could be in a place of compassion and generosity. And acceptance is an inherent part of compassion where we could be like, got it. I accept that's it's not just about I accept you fully exactly as you are. It's I accept that this is who you are and how you're built. And this is how you do things, right? Like I said earlier, the ABCs, actions, behaviors, and choices. And I'll give an example, right? I have people in my family that are really hard to get along with. But I, a long time ago, found a lot of peace by just accepting that they are who they are, right? I can't change who they are. I don't understand why they do the things they do sometimes. However, I can choose how I'm going to engage with it from a place of acceptance that I wouldn't be able to do if I was wanting them to change. Does that make sense?
Well, I was muted. Yes, it makes a lot of sense. What triggered for me was the root of compassion. I remember I read this: passion is to suffer, and compassion is to suffer with. So that's like the root of passion. And I did not know what the root of acceptance was. So I just Googled it real quick. And because sometimes if I get stuck with words, I'm like, all right, what are the root of some of these words? Let me try to decipher a little bit. And it says, take or receive willingly. So acceptance, so take or receive willingly is the root of it. And if compassion is the root, is to suffer with. So one is to suffer with, one is to take or receive willingly. If these are the rooted definitions as far as what the words mean, I don't know what the so what is, but it's like, if we can give meaning, once we give something meaning, then that's going to be more powerful than the word choice. It's like, what does it mean to us? And what I would love to draw out of this, what I would love for the listener to draw out of this, forget about me. It's like, how could we come up with meanings for us that says, okay, I want to be more aware of what's happening with my partner, also with myself. I want to be able to know what's happening with myself, also with my partner, be able to accept that as we just learn to accept, to take or willingly receive who they are as a human. I want to trust myself in them and I want to respect myself in them. I think that's a beautiful framework. And when we create meaning behind this, that's where I think some of the positive change that we all want to see is going to take place.
Yeah. And that's where we kind of like went through some semantics on understanding. So really all I'm getting at is we don't need understanding to have acceptance and compassion for people.
I agree.
Right. And in the process of getting to compassion and acceptance for people, we have to see them. We have to see them as who and how they are. Right. And so again, some people might understand, but what I'm saying about understanding is on the deeper level is that unless you really can walk around in somebody's shoes, there's just a level on which you'll never have full understanding, right? We can understand where people are coming from or whatever, but like, there's a million reasons due to lived experience and all different types of things why we'll never be able to fully understand, but we could be like, I feel for you. That's compassion too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you're able to like tap into some of those emotions, which is sometimes really tough for the immature masculine that doesn't know how to find their yin and yang between the feminine as well, which is coming back to what Roman said. I just need to dance more and just like feel my body more, and like
totally
kind of get in that.
I wrote this down when you were saying that stuff earlier. One of the biggest things men can do, specifically men, for the women in their lives in like a heteronormative context, is get really good at dealing with your own discomfort, with your own emotions. I personally, I'm not interested in partnership. I'm like a solo polyamorous person. And so I do a lot of dating. I love dating. And one of the funniest things to me on dating apps is how many men's profiles are like, no drama. And I always want to be like, the common denominator is you, bro. Like, if you are encountering enough drama in your relationships that you feel like you need to write it in your profile, there's something in you that is participating in, if not triggering and sparking that drama. And often it's like a lack of ability to communicate, emotional immaturity, and stuff like that. It's all solvable stuff, but you got to do your part, right? And often when people jump to those places where they're wanting to blame everybody else, women are dramatic, women are crazy. It's like, no, you don't want to deal with your own discomfort. It's easier to make it about us. And yeah, maybe women are acting out and misbehaving too, but like, why don't we all just look at our part, see why we're uncomfortable, see what's coming up, like do that kind of work. That really adds to creating like safety, to making people feel seen and understood when you deal with your own shit and stop putting it on the other person.
I agree. I think the baggage that we're bringing from our past is oftentimes where some of the conflicts are happening in some of our current relationships. And it's hard to separate from the past when we're coming into the future. It's like, if just because someone with purple hair yelled at you doesn't mean that all people with purple hair are going to yell at you. It's like this presupposition that we're bringing in the past into the current. And that's where astrology gets kind of fun for me. My wife and I, we talk about astrology quite frequently, like, oh, what's your sign? So me knowing myself as a water sign Cancer and a Cancer man, it's like, oh my God, these both Andrew Biggs and myself, both Cancer men, but my rising is a Leo, and then my my moon is the next one is the moon is my Libra. So my Libra moon. So you got the people pleaser in the Libra, you got the fiery Leo that can, really get stuff done. And then also the Cancer as my sun sign, a very sensitive, watery sign as and this awareness. It's like, great, I have this awareness. What's the so what? And I really appreciated what you said, is that now I have the awareness, I have the knowledge. I can create different choices for myself because now I know this. If my drop down menu is, I'm naturally inclined to like be emotional about something, but right now, or when I say emotional, I'm naturally inclined to be more sensitive about something, then instead of choosing sensitivity and making it about me, let's figure out let's look at the whole picture. Let's just not focus on just myself right now. Let's look at all the different parties that are involved with the decision. So I can choose a different response because of that awareness and because I have the knowledge of myself versus just going into the drop-down menu. I wanted to hit on this one before we kind of start heading towards the exits here. I asked the question about what can the masculine or the man do to create the space for the women. I'd love to hear on the opposite of that. If we also know that there's two parts of it, what can the feminine do to create the environment for the masculine to also feel a part of their journey? Because the masculine, if they feel criticized, if the masculine feels closed or confined in any way, shape, or form, that also creates potential conflict too. So the way that a woman feels with feeling unsafe is sometimes how the masculine feels if they're being criticized, or like feeling like they don't have enough freedom or they feel a little closed. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of that and what you speak about when it comes to the feminine or the female doing their part, assuming the masculine or the male does their part.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just need to say this. I hate this. I hate these polarity, the polarity paradigm and frameworks, if you will, because we're all so much more dynamic. And so more important that I want to say than anything, which I'm saying I hate it. I don't care if that's what like people are super into, and orienting around that really helps you. Great. I have reasons why I can't stand it. But the other important thing is, as you're asking me that question, when you say like the man feels criticized, that really kind of goes back to the thing that I said earlier, which the man or whoever, if you shut down when you're criticized, you got to work on that. That's you. Like that's your own job to be able to stay open rather than shutting down when you're uncomfortable or when someone says something that you don't like, right? Like, I don't care what is your gender, what is your orientation, whatever, like that's your own work to do. Which is one of the reasons I don't love these generalizations, because it just really limits us. Like we're all so much more dynamic than this. But then there's also the internal piece of like the inner marriage with the masculine and feminine, where if we're really going to do any of this for other people, we need to be able to access and have a really healthy relationship to our own masculine and our own feminine, and also get into the uniqueness of the expressions of each within ourselves. So then we can dance. All relationships, it's all a dance, right? Like, how does this part of me dance with this part of you? So I just needed to say that part.
I love that.
But when it comes to, this is something that I love so much about being a woman who's heterosexual, who dates men. And it's also funny, and this happened recently. Sometimes I'll be talking to a man and I'll be like, this man should actually just be my client. Because something that a lot of men don't have is they don't have people to talk to. And I know like you're in groups and you're in spaces and front row dads, like that's very cultivated in your world. But a lot of men are out here. I had a man recently, I had just started talking to him on like a Thursday. And then on a Friday, the next day, he was like, oh my God, I have all this insane shit going on. I have to tell someone. And he was telling me. And I'm like, what is your life if the person you feel most compelled to tell is someone you just met yesterday? And this is where I have an immense amount of compassion for the men out there who don't have people that they can actually talk to about real vulnerable shit. So to answer your question, women, whatever you can do to be a witness and a safe space, not a fixer, for the men in your life to actually genuinely share what's like their inner world and not shame them, and also understand how shameful that feels for men, because so much of the programming is boys don't cry, be tough, like whatever, all this shit. And it's like, you all can be just as sensitive as anybody else. And when you're not allowed to be, and you stuff it and stuff it and stuff it, that shit comes out sideways. That's why we see so many men being so abusive, just because they don't have any room to actually be their whole selves either.
I think you'll appreciate this. So, Marsha Martin was on the episode, and she said something was so profound. She said, if boys don't cry because crying makes you weak, well, the only people that are allowed to cry are girls, so therefore girls are weak. And when I heard that shit, I was like, oh, damn. I never really like if you really think about how stupid that paradigm is, and how
it's so stupid.
Oh, it's so stupid. Like, my wife is the furthest thing you'll ever find from weak. She is the strongest human. My mom, my goodness, rest in peace, one of the strongest humans I've ever met in my entire life. So that paradigm is just so dumb. And we obviously need upgrades around a lot of these things. And hence why conversations are so important to be able to speak these things into existence of like, what is the change that we want to see? And I really, really honor you for your response there, because you're right. I don't love the paradigm of the masculine and feminine and the polarities and stuff either. It's just, how else do we explain this without, in a lot of our culture, it's like, if you just say male, female, or men, woman, it's like, it's kind of hard to decipher, even though we're all having this internal battle. But it's like trying to be PC or politically correct or not
Yeah.
hurt someone's feelings or whatnot. But it's this yin and the yang. It's this feminine, it's the mountain and the river. It's like we all have this inside of us, but it is dominant. One is dominant in some people versus others. And when something is a little bit more dominant, then we have to figure out what is the drop down menu. If it's like this is weighted at 9 out of 10 and other things are weighted at a 2 out of 10, we still have accessibility to the 2s out of 10s. We just need to know that it does exist on this drop down menu, but it's not as dominant. And I really love your response there. And I really appreciate you bringing that into the space.
It's also categorical, right? Like when I'm in work mode, sometimes I could be in what people might perceive as masculine. So here, let me just offer just some other language, right? Just because some of the qualities. I interviewed a man many years ago named Ken Page, who has a book called Deeper Dating that like changed my life in like 2018. And what he offered instead of masculine, feminine was instrumentality and expressiveness, right? We could also think about this in terms of the left brain, which would be related to the masculine, and the right brain, which would be related to the feminine. We could think about more structured, more flow, more creative and dynamic, and more regimented. Like there's other ways to say it or think about it. And you can name your own parts however you want, but again, the thing is within each one, because humans are so dynamic, there's still going to be your own unique expression.
It's great. I'm glad you brought that in for sure. And that's something that all of us can work on, myself included, is what are other ways of saying the same thing? So that's really powerful. So, Elizabeth, I have to ask one more question. Then I'm going to ask you these 3 final questions, and we'll head for the exits.
Okay.
At what part? Because I remembered you at Liz, and then you turned into Elizabeth at some point in time. What was
turned into? Yeah.
What was this? What was this evolution? I just wanted to ask you that one.
Honestly, I think it was when I turned 33, and there was just something about me. I was like, I am a grown-ass woman now. I would like to be called by my grown-ass name. That was it. Like Elizabeth just felt like a grown-ass woman's name. And Liz, like I had been Liz DiAlto like my whole life. And especially even in like my brand, my business, it felt like LizDiAlto.com was like this spunky little fitness chick. And I just was not that person anymore. And it was also my own moving into embracing like the fullness of who I am and like all of my parts and all of my power. And not just, I just did not want to be abbreviated anymore.
I am glad I asked. I had a feeling. I didn't want to assume, but I had a feeling there was something there because I got corrected when I emailed your assistant. I was like, oh, I have to ask this question because I know her as well, and I'm glad I did get corrected.
Like, it's so funny because sometimes people get all like butthurt when you correct them. It's like, I don't care. I'm not upset.
Oh, no.
Call me my name.
That's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. And I think, it's actually a lesson for me because the only people that call me Michael is my family, and Michael in my subconscious is like the chubby fat kid who was like bullied as a kid. So when I moved to Florida and created my own independence at 18, I became Mike. I was like, all right, Mike.
Yeah.
And then the only people call me Michael are like my siblings, and even catch myself when I talk to my siblings or my dad. I'm like, hey, I leave a voicemail. Hey, it's me. It's Michael. Call me back whenever you get a chance. And I'm like, why did I just say that? Like, it just like comes out sometimes. Right?
Yeah.
But we like to ask every guest, Elizabeth, 3 questions. They could be short hitting, whatever comes by to top of mind. And then I'm sure our listeners listening to this episode are going to want to stay in touch with you. So after these questions, you could tell us, where we can stay in touch with you. So the first question that we ask every guest is, what do you think the world needs most today?
More inclusivity.
Simple. I love it.
Do you want to say more about that?
I create the space if you wanted to. It's up to you.
It's really, and so much of our conversation has been pointing towards this without actually saying it explicitly. We are all so different and so dynamic, have so many different lived experiences, have so many unconscious biases. And if the world was built in a way for it to be safer and more inclusive for more of a range of people, like so many things that you can't even imagine would change, like the economic ecosystems, like just so much when we are, and I experience this in my own business and my own little like microcosms that I've created through my work. We're obsessed with inclusivity. And when when more people can actually be their whole selves, and it's acceptable, like beautiful, amazing, magical, creative, innovative shit happens. So my answer is more inclusivity, and there's a little context.
Appreciate the context. The second question we ask our guests is, what are 1 to 3 books that you think people should read right now?
Everyone should read All About Love by Bell Hooks.
That's a new one.
I'm just going to go with one, because
That's
if
great.
I had to go through
No,
three,
that's a new
I could
one.
never pick another two.
We appreciate that. So it's a new one we'll add to the list. So thank you. The third question, what does it mean to you to be better than rich?
Well, here's the problem. How do you define rich?
How do you define rich is really the question.
Okay, well, great. I have a framework for this too. I'm like the framework queen. For me, like being successful and prosperous is about sustainability, sufficiency, satisfaction, and soulfulness. So better than or worse than or whatever, as long as for me, I'm hitting those things in my life and in my work, right? Things are enough. They're sustainable. I'm not burning myself out. It's satisfying, deeply satisfying and soulful. Killing it.
And that's why we love asking this question, is because the context is you have to kind of know what the definition of rich is. And in order to be better than that's why it's a really unique question. We actually just released an episode this past Friday, taking that clip and putting it out. It's like 17 minutes of just our guests saying their definition.
Oh, cool.
It's really cool.
That.
It's like 17 minutes of just that. It's really neat. So thank you for your response there. So that you're actually you're only the second person to ask that, by the way, out of every episode we did. You're only the second person to ask, well, it means I have to know what rich means then, huh? So really cool. Elizabeth, this was I love this conversation. I really appreciate how you showed up. I'm sure people that are listening to this show are going to want to stay in touch with you. What are the best ways for them to do that?
They can go to my website, which is untameyourself.com, or they can go to Instagram, which is just my name, at Elizabeth DiAlto. There's always a little Linktree link in my bio on Instagram, and everything I've got going on will always be in that link too.
Cool. And you have a podcast too, right?
Yeah, it's called Embodied. We're coming up on the 8-year anniversary. We're over 400 episodes in this bitch.
Wow. Kudos to you. And that is called Embodied Podcast?
Yeah, the Embodied Podcast. If you just look up my name, it'll come up.
Cool. Awesome. Well, listener, you are in for a treat with more content. I promise you, Saturdays with Elizabeth DiAlto on Instagram will be the highlight of your Saturday.
Saturday Sillies.
You got me with the April Fool's one. I was like, she's definitely going to post this shit. This is April Fool's. So, no, you didn't even post?
No, I did not post.
Oh my gosh. I thought I saw it. I was like, oh, she'll post later in the day, but that's actually, well, never mind. It was not an April. It was an April Fool's.
I didn't even think about that. It was April Fool's on that day. I was just busy.
That was a good one.
That's so funny.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. If there's anything that we could ever do for you, be sure to let us know. And listener, thank you for your time listening to this episode. And listener, if it helped you, it's your turn. Share it with others. Subscribe on YouTube, leave a rating and review. And remember, as always, leave today better than you found it. We'll see you next time.